Warning, the following video has flashing lights and also includes content that may be deemed inappropriate for some viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. Kyle, yes, the official biologist of the North American Dogman Project. It is always excellent to talk science here on StarFox Radio. Yet before we do head out, I must replenish lost nutrients. Much better, a tad bit messier than preferred, but it's not easy to eat your breakfast when it's trying to run away. Without further ado, it is time to take a walk into the darkness.
Stood up. I said, oh my god, it's a werewolf, and everybody in the car freaked out.
My creatures of the night, yes, once again you have tuned in for another episode of Midnight Lycanthropy here on StarFox Radio, the home and the stomping ground of the Midnight Society. We again are sitting by the late night fire, burning the timber and reading some chapters out of the Midnight Society book in an attempt to figure out what is happening, why there is underground cave systems, and who could have made them. And guess what? We're nerding out with our science team again. The North American Dogman Project biologist is in the house with us. Kyle, how you doing, man?
I'm doing pretty good. I hope you're doing well as well. And man, you've sent me some interesting stuff to look at, that's for sure. I got into quite the deep dive, and I'm super excited to see what you think and where this conversation goes.
It's great stuff, my friend. And it's like I try to tell everybody is I am science-based, okay? I'm a journalist. I try to be logical, subjective, objective, and I just look at everything and I gather data upon it, okay? So some interesting stuff we'll be talking about in some future episodes that Kyle and I just spoke about. We'll really be able to solidify what I mean about how we just got to understand there is logic sometimes behind some of these supposedly bizarre encounters that people are having or have had. Meaning, I was just introduced to something extremely interesting about how, in the past, some sort of references towards Sasquatch or Bigfoot or forest people or would actually have been considered racist depictions of actual human beings at that point in time. Not saying Sasquatch doesn't exist because there's plenty of other cases that don't involve that, but that just shows you again an actual real flesh and blood side of it, meaning they weren't some sort of beast. They were people just like you and I that maybe looked a little bit different or dressed different or maybe smelled different. And well, we all know the term racism, so that doesn't need to be explained. That's not what we're here for tonight. I just think it's interesting that there is so much logic sometimes behind things. But now there's also a lot of things that fit into the logic side, but also leave you scratching your head a little bit. And to the audience, Kyle and myself are going to dive into, well, the strange tunnel systems that have specifically been found in the Smokies and underneath the Tennessee area, as well as in Los Angeles and On one of my previous episodes, I spoke about the underground cities across the world, which is strange. And the cynocephali. Yes, we've all heard that term quite a lot, correct? 290 BC, the Greeks, yes. Well, they lived in caves and underground cities. Hmm, very interesting. And also, William White, part of our science team, and some other people that I value that aren't even involved with the North American Dogman Project have hypothesis that potentially maybe some of these ancient civilizations that had these great huge cultures might have inherited that from supposed beings that either grew up beside us or were here before us. And again, we're not here to dive necessarily into that aspect, but there is a theory out there that people can look up that really dives into a lot of aspects of there's a high probability that we weren't the first, I guess, considered remotely intelligent beings. So it's interesting right there because is the cynocephaly something that grew up beside us? Is it now something potentially where the Greeks racist type of aspect? But they couldn't have been the only ones because then you have the culture of India speaking of it, you have the Aztecs. So I don't know if that really falls into it, man, because they're all speaking about something that looks really similar like that. Did this thing was it here before us? I mean, does it fall into the terminology of the ones that built the underground cities? I mean, there's been reports in the past and also right now of these things supposedly battling reptilians, which, if you look into history, there was a case out in LA where this gentleman was funded to dig basically underground to find this city that was reported by a ton of indigenous cultures to have existed where these reptilian-like beings had taken gold and all kinds of other things and placed them under there. Okay, there's got to be a correlation. Why are there these underground cities? I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, humans, for the most part, we like to be above ground, right? So if there was some sort of nuclear explosion back then or something that we had to go underground, sure, or some other culture was forcing you underground, but doesn't that seem like something that would be non-human based?
Yeah, that's such a great intro into this. And there's a couple of articles that we're referencing, but specifically talking about the tunnel system that is potentially a giant underground city underneath the great city of Los Angeles, which already has its own city that it's built on top of two or three times, probably. Um, is crazy to think about. And when I saw that, I had to go and figure out personally when did humans as we know them, in our current understanding of human evolution, when did we arrive to North America? And that's roughly, I'm just going to be very general, 15,000 years ago. It could be earlier, it could be later. I'm not an anthropologist, and I would love to hear their take on this topic for sure. Um, but from what I remember of the article, it was hypothesized that this city would have been there for around 10,000 years. So that puts some species of humans on the continent around the same time. Um, as far as would humans want to live above ground, below ground, I think we're very skewed in that sense because we are the only human species on the planet right now that we know of, and we all prefer to live above ground. There's certain effects that can befall people from living underground for so long without sunlight. I'm not going to get into that. Um, but what I think is really, really important in the whole evolution of humankind is that multiple species that we consider humans along our evolutionary track existed at the same time. So we were sharing, Homo sapiens began, when they began, there are multiple species of humans that are still in the world with them, with us, as history and time goes on. For whatever reason, we are chosen to be the dominant species of humans. Whether that's still the case, there's another species of human beings out there that are still floating around and existing. I don't know, and I don't know if anyone else knows the answer to that. but I wouldn't be surprised necessarily. There's a lot of places in the world that we just don't know about. And is is the tunnels under Los Angeles an example of places that we should be looking? I don't know. I think if there's truly tunnels under there that even Native Americans and other indigenous folks have been telling stories about for years and years and years, I think we should definitely investigate that because there could definitely just be a lot of great historical value to that. Whether there's gold or not, who knows? I know that's usually a driving factor behind expeditions like that. But then it does lean into what you were talking about earlier with, well, yes, let's say yes, there was an indigenous people there that were there before. Maybe there were different subspecies of humans that were separate from the other indigenous people. Were they just discriminated against? Was it a way of characterizing them to always give them a name? Were they actually lizard folk? Were they of a completely different branch of evolution that we have never experienced on our planet? Or were they just depicted as such because of what they wore, what they look like, what they did? I don't know. And I think that's a really interesting question that I hope gets answered one day.
No, great stuff right there, man, and preach. And it's just important to be able to, again, bring up logical explanations for things like that because, again, everyone's got a different depiction of something. There's been numerous studies where they purposely had someone supposedly act like they were running a stop sign or a light, whatever, and they asked all these people what they were wearing. All the shirt colors changed. Sometimes they had a hat on, different brands of cars. People just have different depictions of things, okay? It's like when you look up at the sky, right? You're sitting there laying outside, and I'd be with one of my exes. She'd be like, "Oh, look at this like cool rhinoceros thing," and I'm like, "Dude, that looks like clouds to me." But then again, like I was one of the ones where my brothers and I would be looking at all the books that had a million different pings, and you had to see the one image, and I couldn't see anything except a huge blur. But then my little brothers would be like, "No, look at that cool T-Rex," and I'm like, "Dude, my brain's gonna blow up."
Yeah, and that leads into this wonderful phenomenon that our brains love to see patterns. I think pareidolia is the term, where you see something that shouldn't be there, or you see many things at once. There's lots of stuff anyone can look up about pareidolia. There's many famous paintings of artists that are leaning into that concept. Um, but I think it serves as well, at least in terms of these supposed lizard people, if a bunch of cultures who don't necessarily speak the same language, as there were many different tribes and peoples around the Los Angeles area before um, Europeans came by and colonized, it is a very easy way to go. Those are where the lizard people live, and if that's a common thing that everyone understands that that's a different, those people are just different, and they all look like that. That's probably something that would stick because it's easy, and we're all humans. We all have to do things the easy way if we can. Um, and it's very interesting that for me that a lot of cultures all said the same thing, 100% true. I don't know. It's only one article, which makes me a little suspicious. I'm sure there's more. I didn't dig terribly deeply into that. I just got so stuck into all of the what if. And thanks for providing an opportunity to go back through human evolution. I don't get to do that very often.
No, of course. And it's just again something that it's important to look at, okay? Because I'm not saying that we don't know of something that hasn't quote unquote evolved beside us. But at the same time, people just really got to look at the transparency sometimes. I mean, there are things that walked and roamed the earth only 2 million years ago, and correct me if I'm wrong, that's really not the end of the world. That's not too long ago that were bear dogs, okay? The aspect of the amphicenoids, they were not bear or canine, okay? The amphicenoid was a tweener and it looked very strange. And from its hips, They're very optimistic. It would have had no problem going quadrupedal and bipedal. That sounds a lot like the track pattern that we get, where they seemingly are pushing themselves kind of up with their momentum, and their front arms were longer, just kind of like a bear's were, hence the bear dog. That has to fall into some sort of aspect right there. I mean, the cave hyenas, the Dinopithecus. I mean, all these things existed or maybe still are existing. So that's the scientific aspect that, hey, that's all right there. I mean, no one can refute any of that stuff. They can refute, well, they can't exist anymore and all that. That's not what I'm saying. They can't refute the fact that they did exist at points in time. There is as much proof as you need, okay? But then, sure, when you look back into some of the aspects of the cynocephali, when people are like, all right, well, where are the skulls? Where's the skeletons? Which would be the same thing, I suppose. Where is the evidence? Where is anything about that? All right, logical, great question. But again, if they lived up in the mountains and in caves, that again, though, we know less about caves than we do outer space and the ocean, and we know diddly squat about both of those. So that leaves open a huge realm of where their remains could be. I mean, if these things are smart, which apparently they came down and traded with the Greeks, the Native American cultures, you got the Chinese and Japanese speaking about strange dog beings like this, so they're obviously smart. I mean, gorillas are intelligent. They've been seen taking their deceased and putting them into basically coffins made out of foliage. They've been seen stopping their young while they disable a trap that's been put there by a poacher. Okay, they're smart, and people seem to think they're not as smart as us, whatever, because we judge intelligence on a different way. So if we're going to play by that rule, okay, so let's just play by the human intelligence rule. Well, the cynocephali built weapons, supposedly that they traded with the Greeks and Romans that we liked. Interesting. They had armor. Interesting. They also had other things that the Greeks and Romans and everyone else mentioned felt the need to trade with. Interesting. And, well, Herodotus and Theseus and Alexander the Great speak about them being hellacious warriors, fighting either against them or with them sometimes. If you're spending that much time around something, I feel like you would have to know if that was an animal or a person. And I don't really feel like the Greeks and Romans were really much for jokes and such. I mean, it's great that you do have people like, Theseus and Herodotus that documented things. But man, they weren't really looked upon as the cool kids back in the day in Greece and Rome, okay? As if anyone's ever seen The Witcher, they were kind of looked upon like, I mean, the dude's the man, but the guy that follows the Witcher around all the time and just like documents everything and everyone just like laughs at him, kind of, okay? They were a culture about conquering and being great. So anything they documented, again, everyone can look it up. It's documented by other cultures. So it sounds to me like they knew what they were speaking of when they saw these things. And okay, if they're that smart, then they're going to pull their deceased back to where they belong, where they live, where they can have a burial or such for it, which would be in the cave system if that's where they're depicted that they lived. But nobody goes in the caves because we're scared of caves. Okay, yes, we're scared of darkness and things that comes from evolution, like you were saying. People don't realize that the paranoia aspect is a way for us to survive, okay? Because there are points in times where we had to deal with a ton of predators that would have disposed of us. Why do you think that with when they show infants and projects, don't get me wrong, they had their parents around, but in these experiments, they would show these infants that couldn't speak things that were predators. Okay, what would they do? They would cry or have really scared reactions. But if you showed them something like a butterfly or a sheep, something that's not a predator, they would smile or just giggle. Okay, that's in because in evolution, we had to deal with those things. Why is this kid that's never seen a giant spider screaming its head off when you show it to him? Okay. Also, why do we as humans always see other human faces in the forest and things? Why are we so honed in to pick up on that? Well, there's a high probability and a ton of evidence supporting that the Neanderthals were, well, pretty about eating modern day Homo sapiens, which there's a ton of evidence to support that. And well, what we do, we probably tried to dispose of them, and it's something else we can talk about for another time. But a lot of people seem to think that they might not actually have been completely wiped out, and that when you have the reports of mountain people and Yetis and things, that they're not actually all one and the same, that you have some that are actually unknown apes that are being seen, relatives of the Gigantopithecus, but also you have remnants of these Neanderthal men that or women that are still around. And again, that ties into what you were saying with the pareidoia aspect, because obviously if they were hunting us and consuming us, well, yeah, no matter what, when you see a human-like face, you're going to be afraid of it. So that all makes sense too. But the bottom line is, I don't think the Greeks and Romans were getting that all mixed up. I mean, they seem to be pretty smart and advanced. And I don't know, man, you would have to be one heck of a trickster and a whole group of tricksters to pull that over on the Greeks, the Romans, the Aztecs, and all that, and just keep a hoax going like what, thousands and thousands of years ago?
Well, and that really ties in what we talked about last time, where there are themes that are consistent throughout cultures separated by thousands and thousands of miles. Um, the Greeks and the Romans stole a lot from the Greeks, so I could see an argument saying, well, they just took what the Greeks said, and maybe the Greeks portrayed some what they considered barbarian peoples to the north or to wherever to be dog-like, and they were ferocious warriors and whatever. But the fact that you get the same iconography in the Aztec and in China, there's either a culture who is really pulling a good one and a really good fast one on everyone, or we're all just horrible human beings. We've always been horrible, and we consider everyone animalistic that isn't like us. Or the third option is that there is something going on that we just don't know about and we have not been able to confirm, at least in terms of modern science and modern thought processes. Um, the ancients of our species certainly believed that there was something, um, and that they could be trusted or that they could be not trusted. You were talking about Neanderthals, and that's not even just the only species of humans that Homo sapiens have probably extirpated and outcompeted. There are tons of other species that we're coming up with all the time that coexisted alongside Homo sapiens. That sure we might look the same, we might do kind of the same things, but at the end of the day, I'm in competition with you, and my species has to survive. So that becomes a thing to fear, a thing to want to conquer, and just because you have one batch, one generation that is trading, we see time and time again, even in just normal human history, that the desires of cultures change. So the Greeks and Romans could be trading with these unknown peoples for generations, and then at one point in time it ends. And whether that's because the Roman Empire ends and a lot of good historical record, or that they decide that it's over and we're done and we conquered them. And the winners write the histories, but they just disappeared. There's a lot of unanswered questions, just even talking about it from a historical standpoint, not even talking from a scientific standpoint of what's going on here. And I wish I knew the answer. And it might be one of those questions that if you get to ask God three questions, that might be one of them.
Yeah, man, that's some gnarly, excellent, great stuff right there as well. And I don't really have any more answers, like you said, to the topic, except for just being able to bring up things and share it with people. But it is extremely mind blowing. And I don't know, it's just interesting to me because the Greeks and Romans, yeah, they were messed up, obviously, like every other great empire. I mean, every race of individuals that would be considered an epic empire all would will have disturbing aspects to them. I mean, it all depends on, I guess, the depiction of something. I mean, the Aztecs were considered a very advanced great civilization. Well, they also wouldn't wait till the next morning just to see if the sun would come up. They felt the need to rip people's hearts out and throw them down pyramid stairs. So okay, yes, we all know that even though these advanced cultures had their messed up sides, there are things that show their advancements. I mean, Rome had basically like a form of electricity to an extent. They had running water. They were able to cultivate food, make extremely advanced weapons. And ironically, when the Romans overtook Greece, they loved Greece so much that they were like, hey, you can still have Athens and act like it's Greece, but yeah, you're basically enslaved by us now. So the Romans had a huge love affair with the Greek culture and such. So, like you said, they're obviously going to potentially inherit some of that, but I don't know, man. It's just too hard for that points in time to have all those cultures speaking as something that looks the same. I mean, you got the Greeks and Romans showing them and speaking about them in armor. You got the Aztecs showing them wearing the same sort of headdresses and Native American get-ups. Okay, and then you have the Chinese and Japanese depictions where they're stalking soldiers in the forest with the jet black fur and the bright red eyes. These cultures just would not have communicated with each other like today, meaning, hey, if I had a friend over in Japan or something, I can text them or message them, and it's very easy to communicate. At this point in time, it was nearly impossible to get to an area and then successfully come back and translate that information, meaning, yes, it could occur. Nothing's impossible. But for the Aztecs to have per se be able to have spoke to, let's say, the Greeks or Romans, they would have had to have existed at the same time.
Yeah, it just brings up so much more to think about because there's all those depictions of like Goths and Huns fighting the Romans, but they wear either nothing at all or animal skins. And is that because they got it from the wolf, which is what is the popular, and I'm going to go with the anthropologists on this, that it supposedly brings the animal spirit to the warrior, and you have all that. But is there a secondary answer that we just don't have any evidence for? Are they mimicking another intelligent peoples that once, or still do, roam the world with us, that were more scary to fight than just humans? It it brings up a lot of questions to dive down this rabbit hole and to think of all the possibilities and all that could happen and maybe still is happening or never happened at all. And that's the great thing about all of it, is this, all of it could just never have happened and we don't know the answer, or it could have happened and now it's over and we just get to try and piece together the history of it, which is probably the more likely case since there is so much of this cultural evidence throughout history, through multiple dynasties of China falling and rising, through multiple cultures going through Greece and Rome, and all of the culture blending. It's just uncanny that many things stay the same and very consistent. It does feel like it's more and more becoming a matter of will we ever piece it together? And unfortunately, if you're going to delve into the underground and the undercities, like you said before, we are a terrestrial species that like to live above ground. Being underground is scary and treacherous and dangerous. It's not something that humans have done much of, and the ones who have, there's not a really good track record of them coming back alive.
Hmm.
So it's one of those things that I dread that it will be a mystery to never be solved. But I would really like, especially for something like the city of Los Angeles, just dig a hole. We gotta get to the bottom of it.
Yeah, no, isn't that the truth, man? I mean, like you just stated, bottom line is people, unless out of need or necessity, short periods of time, sure could have dwelled underneath the ground. But overall, that doesn't seem logical, and it doesn't even seem like it was something that was done by humans, because in these underground cities that have been looked upon, they're structures, but that doesn't mean it's man-made or human-made, I should say. Okay, there's not really any sort of signs of what tools were used. And again, that's a lot of work. Not that it can't be done. And same thing when people were like, oh, well, how did the Egyptians do their pyramids? And that's a whole nother thing. But also, again, people don't understand. Let's talk logic for a second. There are magnetic pulls and such, and there are ways that nature works where you could, in theory, I wasn't there, okay? I'm not somebody that can break it down for this. I'm not a physicist, but I'm just saying that magnetic poles and things do exist, okay? And it messes with the electronics, but also makes things lighter. What's a magnet? I mean, a magnet, whoop, sucks something towards that. Whoever made a magnet didn't just come up with that idea. They were playing with stones and such that, oh, wait a second, look at the magnetic pole. Same thing with a compass. Someone didn't just make up a compass. They started off with a primitive way, like someone does in the water and watching something spin. So you have all that aspects right there, but then it still doesn't solidify anything to do with like the underground cities and all these cultures that speak about it. I mean, I believe there's like 12 or 15 known underground cities across the world. And I do believe one is in the Ukraine or the Czech Republic or somewhere around that area. And it's massive. Again, they don't know why it's down there or who or what created it. And same thing under Montreal, people don't realize there are a ton of underground systems that will lead you to different areas like the malls and here or there. And a lot of people seem to think that we just happened to build onto that, that we weren't the ones that built all these underground passages. We just happened to use them, no different than a bear, like you were saying. It doesn't go off and make a new den if it can either overtake somebody else's or it's already pre-made, okay? Like you said, humans, animals, path of least resistance. I mean, everyone can look it up. Energy exposure is why predators don't go after predators usually, and why predators chill most of the day, and why, something like a herbivore has way more energy to go completely berserk on people. Exactly right there. So it's completely super interesting because energy, yes, that's nutrients and such, and there's a lot of dang energy expelled to be building underground areas like that. And well, throughout our history, it doesn't really say we like to be underground, so that doesn't add up. And yeah, I think we'll end up getting to the bottom of it more. We just got to keep on grinding and having great minds such as yourself and Colleen. Just really take a second to try to look at this stuff and figure out and realize. I mean, sure, there's a lot of questions, but there's also a ton of answers, meaning these cities exist, these structures and tunnels exist, these cave systems exist. So does the cynocephaly and the dogman and all that exist? Well, it doesn't have the solidified evidence like on all the things we just spoke about. I mean, the caves are there. Anyone can go look at a cave system, okay? I mean, anyone can look at the maps and look at images of underground cities themselves. I mean, sure, there's more, but I'm just saying all that stuff's like right there. Can anybody go look up a documentary with full-fledged pictures and somebody chilling with a dogman or Bigfoot or any of these things? No. So does that mean that's not real? No, that's not my point. What I'm trying to say is that there is things that people should be looking at, meaning, like William says, you got good science and bad science. Bad science is putting things into the narrative and the perspective that we want it to be. But good science means, you might not want your hypothesis to be true, but you're putting things where they belong and you're not overlooking something. So the fact that cave systems, missing people, tunnels, underground cities, hmm, that has to have some sort of inclination of at least some sort of advanced culture, whether it was hominoid or human based or I don't know, ancient or extraterrestrial. I don't deal in hundreds, but that's pretty dang close to saying or proof that something else had to have occurred.
Yeah, and I know Colleen and I wanted to get into when we finally meet up and have the time to do an episode with you as a big group. We wanted to get into animal adaptations for living under the ground. So I'll try not to get into that too much, but just thinking about what would cause a people, just thinking about um, intelligent life, what would cause a people, whether they are alien, something we don't know about, or human, what would cause a civilization to put all the time and effort, like you're saying, into building a city underground? What is the benefit? Speaking from a human standpoint and what I understand, there's not much benefit to us as a species except to escape some natural disaster or to expand living space. But these cities are so large, why would you put so much effort into that? When living above ground, you can just build a much cheaper wall around a large city. Plus, if you're in a culture that is entirely based underground, how are you going to feed that many people? How are you going to water that many people? Do you require a lot of food? Do you require a lot of water? Do you use water? There's so many questions that stem from just why would intelligent life be underground in the first place? And then there's the just the existential, is it for religious purposes is also another thing. People do weird things all the time for their belief. And at the time it wouldn't seem weird. Pharaohs built pyramids, took thousands and thousands of man hours and lots of people, lots of lives to build pyramids so that they could ascend to their gods at the end of their life. People do things all the time for weird reasons. But that's the questions that are left for me is, if this is intelligent life, what drove them underground? Is it the simple fact that they were competing with Homo sapiens and we were becoming the dominant species, and that was the last vestige to go and try and survive and eke out a living? And if that's true, are we just experiencing the remnants of that culture that was spread throughout the world like we are? Are we just experiencing the few survivors that are still breeding, still surviving, but in small groups because they don't have a coherent population anymore to divide labor? Or is it actual Homo sapien construction and it's a culture conflict thing? Those are questions that I have about that, and I would be very interested to see the answer to that. And like you said, I don't think we're going to find out about that tomorrow. But there's a lot of really keen minds out there that I'm happy are in that field and really working hard on that.
Yeah, that's some great stuff right there, man. And that's pretty much like you hit it right there to the spot, man. I mean, people do some pretty strange things or elaborate things based off whatever it is, a belief system could be, etc. So, no, I mean, that's just what I mean about the aspect of people needing to just look at the insides and outsides of everything. But again, I mean, you can't cultivate any sort of food down there. It's just dang bizarre to really have that occur. And on a final note, I encourage people to check out this documentary where I can't use the word, but born to unalive, but the word is not that. And it talks about just how humans, man, we're just really bred for destruction and the violence that throughout our history that we have ensued on animals or other species or other humans is beyond anything that any other known animal on this earth delves into, okay? So, yeah, there's definitely a high probability with anything. I mean, sure, they could have either left or just went extinct or just want nothing to do with people, or we could have, well, been the end of them. I mean, it seems that no matter what bothers us, we tend to rid ourselves of them, okay? Whether it was the moonshiners wanting to moonshine and having to deal with the wolves, so they smoked a ton of them, or people, couldn't catch whales, so they wanted to start catching polar bears and almost wipe them out in like the late 1800s and such. I mean, it's just what we do best. Polar bears are gnarly, dude. They're one of the only known animals that actually hunts people purposely. Didn't stand a chance versus the people, man. They still just disposed of it. So I don't really even think if, say, T-Rexes were still around, dude, at the end of the day, that wouldn't stand a chance versus people either, man. I mean, if people are disposing of elephants that easily and things and crocodiles, I mean, those are all pretty gnarly animals. Tigers, Jude, massive Kodiak bears. Unfortunately, none of those animals stand a chance versus people. I mean, sure, they win sometimes, but I'm just talking about at the end of the day, if you get five, six, seven, eight, nine people together and they want to go get something, dude, I mean, they're gonna get it, dude. I don't care how big that Kodiak bear is. You got eight or nine people loaded up with, semi-automatic and automatic weapons. The thing's gonna get smoked, dude. So it's really no different than, like a short-faced cave bear or cave lions. I mean, they have proof of people that were able to most likely disable this cave lion with one thrust of the spear when they threw it because of where it had hit in the bones and such. And it was still like a lot of flesh because of, the ice melt and such. So super interesting stuff. But that showed right there that, well, they obviously, our ancestors had no problem confronting cave lions. I mean, they were pretty dominant predators. So right there, obviously, we wanted their cave or they were pissing us off or something. And I mean, there's even depictions of and proof of them hunting cave bears. I mean, dude, those cave bears were like almost 12, 14 feet tall and spent 90% of their time in caves. I don't know, man. Some of these crazy SOBs, dude, same thing. Eight, nine, 10 of them went up in there while the bears were hibernating. Yeah. And obviously, you know how hibernation works. There had to have been points in time where those bears woke up and there was a huge confrontation. They'd lead the bear out of the cave and just chuck huge rocks on its head. So, yeah, it's a great documentary, but it really just solidifies how dominant we are. And it's not necessarily us 1v1, it's how we're able to collaborate and work together and use weapons and things. And like a lot of those supposedly Neanderthal encounters, they would use like sticks and rocks and such, but they didn't really necessarily have like the capabilities of the more modern day, man. We had like the ability to throw spears and we had bow and arrows because people don't realize when you look at like the structure of Neanderthals, they were short and stocky, okay? They couldn't even really necessarily probably reach over their head. So they would have had a lot of hard times, using bows and necessarily being totally able to just use like thrusting motions, like to throw a huge spear and such. So again, they're limited with that, and they were, like I said, we're using rocks and stuff. So you bring in a modern day man, and you have eight, nine, 10 of them. It doesn't matter if that Neanderthal is super short and stocky, can just like take you on one on one. You got four or five, 10 people there, they're gonna take it out. So it's just moral of the story, more or less. And yeah, thanks for stopping in tonight, man, and hanging out with us because it's always interesting to pick your mind and hear what you have to say for sure. And being a scientist, people can't really not listen to you, man. I mean, I'm just a journalist, so if people don't want to listen, that's their choice. But when it comes to science and credentials and proof and such, well, if people want to learn, they should really listen. So I do look forward to getting you back on here soon, man, and trying to figure out what the heck's occurring, dude.
Yeah, thanks. And like I'm gonna say the same thing. People should go look at that documentary 'cause that sounds overview of humankind. And yes, we are capable of incredible cruelty in what we've done to this planet and everyone that we've lived with, be them sentient, be them other humans, be them animals. Um, but I just like to remind everyone that we're also capable of incredible kindness and to try and do that every day, at least one or two things. I try myself to add one more good thing than I do bad thing every day. But yeah, thanks for having me on, and I'm really excited to see what topic we talk about next. Hopefully, get Colleen in, and we will educate people on adaptations for living underground in the natural world.
Ooh, you legends, you. I do appreciate every single one of you. And if you could please like, comment, subscribe, and feed the algorithm, share the truth, and remember, massacres make the dream work, or something like that.